You know that feeling when something fundamental shifts beneath your feet, maybe even if you can't immediately see the cracks?
Yeah.
That's kind of what's happening right now with the software and services that, well, power our digital lives. These seemingly invisible global connections are facing a pretty significant shakeup.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it, how these high-level trade decisions can translate into very real changes in the technology we use every single day.
Exactly.
It's not just about pure economics, it's really about the evolution of our digital world.
Exactly. So today we're taking a deep dive into the anticipated ripple effects of the 2025 tariffs, specifically on service and software companies. And this is all based on some really insightful recent analysis.
Hmm.
Think of this as maybe your shortcut to understanding how these tariffs could reshape the tech landscape, without needing to wade through complex trade agreements.
Yeah, our goal today is to move beyond just listing the tariffs and really unpack what they mean for the technology you rely on, and also how the companies providing those crucial services are adapting.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The analysis points to three key areas where these tariffs are going to have a major impact. First, a pretty substantial 25% tariff on cloud computing and IT services.
Right.
And this covers, well, everything from the fundamental infrastructure like cloud storage and data centers right through to the software as a service, the SaaS platforms many of us use constantly.
And that's a really significant lever. I mean, cloud infrastructure, those SaaS platforms,
Yeah,
they're the bedrock of so much of the modern digital economy.
totally.
A 25% hike on infrastructure and platforms coming from certain regions, that will inevitably put, well, serious pressure on operational costs for a huge number of U.S. software providers. It's not just a small surcharge.
Right, it's serious. And it's not just the obvious players either. Even the big American cloud providers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they're all feeling this.
Hmm.
A surprisingly large amount of their sort of foundational infrastructure and hardware either comes directly from specific regions or uses components made there.
That's a key point.
So when the analysis talks about alternate sourcing and partnering strategies, that's not just like a suggestion. It's becoming a critical necessity.
And it's definitely not a simple flip of a switch. Companies that currently run data centers with origins facing these tariffs, they're now looking at potentially complex and frankly very expensive transitions
Or two.
to alternatives maybe in places like Southeast Asia or India. And this also brings up a crucial point about potential bottlenecks.
Okay.
Think about industries that depend on incredibly fast, real-time cloud computing financial markets, e-commerce transactions, the core of telecommunications.
Yeah, milliseconds count.
Exactly. They could face real headwinds because of these increased costs for just storing and processing data.
That's a really interesting point about the bottlenecks. Okay, moving to the second key tariff area. A 20% tariff on software licenses and intellectual property products, again, coming from specific regions. And these regions have really become significant hubs for software development, particularly in cutting-edge areas like AI, cybersecurity solutions, even blockchain tech.
Yeah, this tariff hits U.S. companies directly if they've integrated software solutions from these areas into their own products or services.
So it's embedded.
It's embedded. The analysis suggests that mid-sized software developers and IT consulting firms are probably going to feel this most acutely. They face increased operational expenses, sure, but they also need to explore alternative sources for licenses and IP.
Like where?
Maybe looking towards regions like Eastern Europe or South Korea, perhaps. This isn't just a price hike, it forces a strategic rethink.
It really sounds like a major reshuffling.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, the third area involves tariffs of 10 to 15% on software development services.
Right.
Think about all the companies relying on offshore teams, maybe in places like India, the Philippines, for coding, testing, just general software development work.
Exactly. Now, these aren't physical imports in the traditional sense, obviously, but these tariffs on services provided by developers based overseas mean U.S. companies are now looking at higher costs for that outsourced work. And this is particularly impactful for small and medium-sized businesses, the ones that have really leveraged the cost efficiencies of global talent sourcing.
Okay, so taking a step back,
Yeah.
what does this actually mean for the services and software categories we all encounter daily? Let's dive into the impact on specific subsectors.
Yeah.
First up, cloud and data services.
Okay.
We've sort of touched on the rising costs already, but the analysis really highlights the pressure on companies. They either have to pass those increased costs on to us, the users.
Or aggressively seek out new, more cost-effective providers. It's a tough choice.
Yeah.
And what's intriguing here is the potential domino effect. Higher infrastructure costs can ripple through a huge array of other digital services that just depend on that underlying infrastructure.
Everything builds on it.
Exactly. And as we discussed, the challenges faced by those needing to shift away from existing data centers in specific regions, it just underscores how deeply entrenched these dependencies have become.
And for those industries that absolutely rely on that real-time cloud computing,
Yeah.
you mentioned finance, e-commerce.
Yeah, think about the milliseconds that matter in financial trading, or just that expectation of instant loading times on e-commerce sites.
Right, nobody waits anymore.
Nobody waits. Increased data storage and processing costs could really throw a spanner in the works there.
Although,
What's that?
well, it makes you wonder, could this spur innovation?
That's a really interesting thought. Will these increased costs act as a catalyst, maybe spurring the development of more efficient data storage or processing tech elsewhere?
Could be. It's definitely a question worth pondering. Okay, let's pivot to software development and IT consulting.
Right.
The analysis here paints a picture of companies really grappling with these rising operational costs and disruptions to their, established supply chains.
Especially those IT consulting firms that built their models around offshore teams in specific regions, they're facing pressure on the pricing of the services they offer back to their U.S. clients. It hits their core model.
So if we connect this to the broader trends, we're seeing a clear reevaluation of where companies source their tech talent globally, right?
Absolutely. The analysis specifically mentions a possible shift towards places like Vietnam, India, or Eastern Europe as companies look for regions that aren't subject to the same tariff pressures.
Makes sense.
However, it's also worth noting, increased demand in those alternative regions could, eventually, lead to rising costs there too. It's not a magic bullet.
Good point. And it's the smaller firms, isn't it? Those
Yeah.
that have really relied on cross-border subcontractors for cost-effective solutions, they face a particularly tough situation.
Definitely. Their pricing models, which were built on those efficiencies, suddenly look much less competitive.
Yeah.
This could potentially lead to some consolidation within the market, with smaller players struggling to absorb these increased costs. It really underscores the importance of being agile, exploring alternative sourcing avenues early on.
Okay, now let's talk cybersecurity services. This is obviously a really critical area.
It's hugely critical.
And the reliance on software and hardware made in certain regions is prompting companies to, really scrutinize their relationships with vendors.
And what's particularly sensitive in this sector is the challenge for companies that have integrated security software originating from specific areas into their own service offering.
Like it's part of their package.
Exactly. The new tariffs essentially make these offerings more expensive overnight, forcing a rapid search for cost-effective alternatives, or, as the analysis suggests, maybe exploring nearshoring options closer to home.
And it's not just about the direct impact of the tariffs themselves, is it? You've also got the added complexity of navigating data privacy, cybersecurity regulations. They're constantly evolving.
Oh, absolutely. Trying to manage all of that while also keeping costs under control, that sounds like a significant challenge, a real headache for CSOs.
Yeah.
It really highlights just how interconnected our global tech supply chains are and the potential vulnerabilities that can arise from that.
So diversifying vendors.
In crucial areas like cybersecurity, yeah. It becomes not just a financial consideration, but really a fundamental security imperative.
Right. Okay, moving on to the world of fintech and digital payments. You might not immediately connect tariffs with this sector.
But they're definitely feeling it.
Yeah, the analysis points out the impact on software licenses and services that are pretty foundational to this industry.
Well, many fintech companies depend heavily on software developed in specific regions for core functionalities. Think blockchain applications, payment gateway infrastructure, fraud prevention systems.
The engine under the hood.
Exactly. These tariffs could lead to delays in releasing new products, new features, as companies are basically forced to seek out vendors that aren't subject to these tariffs.
And just like we saw with general software development, the increasing cost of offshore development is leading some fintech firms to rethink those arrangements.
Right, considering bringing some of that work back on shore, perhaps, to mitigate the tariff-related overhead. This trend of reshoring, even if it's just a partial shift, could have broader implications, for domestic job creation maybe, and the overall cost of digital financial services for consumers eventually.
Interesting. Finally, let's consider artificial intelligence and machine learning, AI and ML. This is a field that has relied so heavily on specialized hardware and software.
And these new tariffs are impacting both quite significantly.
Absolutely. The cost increases from tariffs on AI software and the crucial hardware components, specialized processors, GPUs. They're disrupting the entire AI ecosystem.
It's not just the physical tools then.
No, it's also affecting the very software that powers these advanced AI solutions, the algorithms, the platforms.
So the analysis indicates a real push for US-based AI companies to identify new software providers.
Yes, or even consider relocating some of their operations entirely to regions not affected by these tariffs. Places like Taiwan, South Korea, India come up.
It really underscores the intense global competition in the AI space and how trade policies can exert a considerable influence on where innovation and development ultimately happen.
Okay, so if we zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. The analysis really emphasizes the significant role that specific regions play in the global software and services ecosystem overall.
Yeah, we're talking cloud infrastructure, AI development, cybersecurity tools, data analytics platforms. I mean, they are major players across the board.
Which adds pressure.
Right.
The analysis talked about added pressure on U.S. companies to diversify their sourcing strategies.
It does. And it's not solely about the tariffs, remember? There are also significant cybersecurity and intellectual property concerns that are driving this whole reevaluation. It's multi-layered.
And it's not always as simple as just finding something labeled made in region X.
Not at all. The analysis highlights how the influence of companies from these regions extends even to services originating from other countries through collaborative development efforts and partnerships.
So it's a really interconnected global network.
Very much so. Which means these tariffs and the increased scrutiny that comes with them are really posing challenges for U.S. providers, particularly in the sensitive sectors we talked about: AI, cloud, cybersecurity.
And the fact that even major U.S. tech companies rely on infrastructure provided by firms from these regions.
Like Alibaba and Tencent providing cloud infrastructure, yeah. That underscores the depth of this reliance. It's quite embedded.
Which naturally leads to this significant reevaluation of supply chains.
Yeah.
Tariffs are one factor.
But the growing concerns around data sovereignty add another layer of urgency. Companies are really having to think hard about where their data is stored, where it's processed, who has access.
And the financial implications are substantial. The analysis estimates operational cost increases. What was it?
In the range of 10% to 20% potentially, just in overhead for software and IT services companies.
That's considerable. That's a big hit to profitability.
Especially for those SaaS and cloud-based solutions, right? Their entire business model is so closely tied to the pricing of that underlying infrastructure, they're very sensitive to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And for companies using offshore development teams in these regions, they're not only facing higher costs from the tariffs, but also potential limitations in capacity as demand for talent shifts and maybe concentrates elsewhere.
Squeeze from both sides.
Pretty much. And we can't overlook the regulatory environment either.
Oh, yeah.
The analysis points out that companies are sometimes being compelled to relocate operations or maybe modify their software just to comply with stricter regulations. That leads to those unwelcome delays and complex compliance procedures, adds cost and time.
It really underscores the multifaceted nature of the challenges companies are facing. It's not just the direct cost of the tariffs.
No, it's all the indirect costs, too. Adapting to this whole evolving landscape. It takes time, money, and strategic effort.
Okay, so companies are clearly feeling the pressure. What are the strategic responses? What are they actually doing? The analysis highlights diversification of operations as a key one.
Absolutely. That's a natural risk mitigation strategy. We're seeing major players in tech actively expanding their infrastructure, their presence in other regions.
Whereabouts?
Think about Europe, India, the Middle East. It's a way to hedge against these potential disruptions from any single region.
And it's not just the giants making moves, right?
No, the analysis indicates smaller firms are increasingly looking to establish partnerships with local providers in markets outside these specific tariff-affected regions.
For what kind of services?
A whole range. Software development, customer support, IT consulting, finding local expertise.
This move towards regionalization, fostering local partnerships, that could lead to more robust, maybe more flexible supply chains?
It certainly could. And it also stimulates growth in those alternative markets, which is another interesting side effect.
There's also the element of innovation, isn't there? The analysis suggests companies are exploring new business models, maybe even fundamentally redesigning products.
Yes, to reduce their dependence on components or services originating from these specific regions, particularly in sensitive areas like cybersecurity and AI.
Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say.
It often is. These tariffs could actually act as a catalyst for innovation. Companies seeking creative solutions to overcome these challenges might develop more self-reliant technologies in the process.
And this brings us to a really crucial aspect, the role of market research. The analysis really emphasizes just how vital having good, up-to-date intelligence is for navigating all this uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. In an environment as dynamic and, frankly, with as many unknowns as this one, robust market research isn't just helpful, it's essential for making informed strategic decisions. You can't fly blind.
So the analysis breaks down some specific ways market research is proving invaluable. First, supplier mapping and risk assessment.
Yeah, it's about identifying those alternative suppliers outside the affected regions, maybe in India, Brazil, Eastern Europe, and really evaluating their capabilities or long-term stability.
And keeping an eye on the politics, too.
And closely monitoring those ever-changing geopolitical risks. This proactive approach to understanding the supply chain's intricacies is absolutely critical. It lets companies anticipate disruptions before they happen, build more resilient networks.
Okay, then there's component cost and pricing analysis, with tariffs driving up costs.
Companies need a really clear understanding of price trends for things like cloud infrastructure, AI development tools, you name it. Market research helps them renegotiate contracts, explore new pricing strategies.
And figure out how to manage potential price hikes for their own customers.
Exactly. Without alienating them, having that transparency, those data-driven insights into pricing, is key to navigating these cost pressures effectively.
Service optimization and delivery models are also under intense scrutiny. How does research help there?
Well, it helps companies track the performance of different outsourcing locations, looking at factors like labor costs, availability of specific tech skills, local regulations. All that informs those crucial decisions about nearshoring or maybe even reshoring operations. Where's the best strategic fit now?
It's about finding that optimal balance, I suppose, between cost efficiency, access to talent, and geopolitical stability long term.
Precisely. And with potential price increases looming for end users, understanding how customers might react becomes even more important.
Definitely. So market research helps forecast customer response.
Yes, allowing companies to tailor their pricing, maybe offer targeted discounts, and really focus on retaining their existing customer base. It's about understanding price sensitivity and how customers perceive value in this changing landscape.
Okay, lastly, regulatory tracking and scenario planning.
Crucial. Staying on top of those constantly evolving trade agreements, government regulations, data laws, it's essential.
So research helps anticipate shifts, like possible bans on certain tech providers.
Exactly. And it allows them to run those critical what-if scenarios. What if X happens? What's our plan? It helps them prepare for unexpected changes. Being proactive based on solid intelligence gives a significant competitive edge.
And on that note, here's a key insight, sort of a fast fact straight from the analysis. To effectively address these tariffs, many software and service companies are actively using market research right now to explore alternative sourcing regions. India, Eastern Europe, Latin America are mentioned, all with the goal of building more agile and resilient supply chains.
That really highlights the practical, direct application of market research. It's being used to tackle the very real challenges presented by these tariffs day in, day out.
So to bring it all together, it's quite clear that these 2025 tariffs are introducing a major period of change, a real shakeup in the global technology landscape.
No doubt about it, we're seeing significant upward pressure on costs and a fundamental rethinking of how tech supply chains are structured.
And different segments of the software and services sector are experiencing the impact in their own specific ways.
But, while these shifts undoubtedly present considerable challenges for many companies, it's also important to recognize the potential upside, the potential for innovation, the development of more robust, geographically diverse tech ecosystems.
Right, it's not all doom and gloom.
Not necessarily. This could ultimately lead to a more resilient, more adaptable global tech industry in the long run.
And that leaves us with this final thought for you, the listener. As these tariffs continue to reshape the world of software and services that we all depend on, what currently overlooked regions, or maybe emerging technologies, might just step forward. Who could become unexpected key players in the software and services you'll be using in the years to come?
That's a great question. Definitely something worth keeping a close watch on.